Hey everyone, my name is Jared Miller and I'm the ministry lead here at The Creek. Over the past couple of weeks, we've been taking a look at the story of Job and in particular looking at its place in the Hebrew Bible. And as we wrap up the middle section of the book, which is a series of dialogues between Job and his friends, there has, we find out, been a friend who has been silent to this point. This is the part where Elihu finally speaks up. From the perspective of Job as a narrative, Elihu makes no sense. Imagine you're watching four of your best friends engage in a blistering back and forth and you just sit there quietly. No piling on, no peacemaking, and no bailing either. Elihu simply is there to listen, digest, and ultimately bring us back to the main point of the book of Job, which is, what do you do with a broken hallelujah? Funny enough though, it's actually because Elihu makes no narrative sense that we remember that whoever it was that committed Job's story to paper in the first place wasn't actually trying to recount history or narrative. What they were trying to do was look at the way wisdom was being used and critique the ways it was being misused. Elihu exists in the book of Job because the book of Job wants to challenge the neat and tidy ways that we deal with suffering and loss and despair, and even the ways we deal with faith. And so it's Elihu, not Job, who is actually the primary teacher in this book. Elihu begins first by deconstructing theodicy as a concept. By speaking in turn to each of Job's friends, he begins to pick apart the arguments that they were making, and by turning his attention first to them, each of whom represent one of the great classical archetypes of theodicy identified first by Max Weber, Elihu challenges our very understanding of the concept of justice. How we perceive justice or injustice, Elihu suggests, is not so much the question we need to ask as, what do we mean when we talk about justice? Is justice something that God establishes as extrinsic to God's self? Or is justice so much a part of God's character that what God does is just regardless of how we perceive it? This is being written probably around the same time as Plato's Euthyphro dilemma, where he asks, is something good because the gods love, or do the gods love because something is good? In the case of Job, however, we find ourselves grappling with a fundamentally different notion of God than the Greeks had. Here, for Elihu, God is definitionally a being greater than the greatest being that can be imagined. And so justice must be intrinsic to God, or God is simply not God. Having then established a relationship between God and justice, Elihu turns his attention toward Job and invites him not to reconsider his act of penance, but to reconsider his approach to it. Job may not have done anything outwardly to warrant the tragedy he has experienced, but Elihu offers that this is ultimately secondary to the relationship that exists between God and humanity. Elihu offers a theological position here that would be echoed centuries later by the likes of Augustine, that our being as humankind fundamentally lives for control of the world around us, that every action we take is fraught with complexity because regardless of what our outward actions ultimately look like, our heart always wants to boast, excel, and succeed. We want to take priority in our own life, and that is the fundamental breaking point in any relationship between God and humanity. Next week, we'll start looking at how God defends himself. But for now, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. All the best, and we'll talk to you soon. Cheers.